Hi, this is my review of The Dark Eye Core Rules. The Dark Eye, also known in Germany as the Schwarze Auge, is a fantasy role-playing game that is somewhat of a legend. It even managed to outsell Dungeons & Dragons, and it started out as a way to bring the Dungeons & Dragons experience into Germany. However, throughout the years and in its current existence, the Dark Eye is a very different beast on its own. It's a very powerful, story-driven role-playing game that smoothly integrates narrative elements with simulationist mechanics. Now let's talk about the quality of the PDF. The quality is great. Perhaps it would have been slightly better if they added hyperlinks, because there are references to different pages throughout the PDF. So navigating the PDF through the use of hyperlinks would have been a bit more smooth, but everything else is top-notch. You have bookmarks, you have awesome-looking illustrations, some of the best illustrations that I've seen in fantasy. A few of them seem slightly out of proportion, that is, with heads slightly larger than the bodies, but most of them are quite beautiful. You have great graphic design, the pages look like the pages of some sort of grimoire. I also like the look of dragon scales at the borders of the pages. And this is probably one of the best translation jobs that I've seen. If I didn't know that the Dark Eye was a German role-playing game, I would have thought that it was originally written in English. Everything is very clear, very well written. And I also love the spaces between the letters and the words and the lines. It makes for very smooth reading. It's one of those books that you read 50 pages and you didn't even notice. And this is actually quite a thick book. You have 418 pages, but most of those pages have to do with spells and skills and professions. So it's mostly there to help you develop your character and have adventures. You just have to memorize a few rules. And even so, the document is really easy to access the different references during gameplay. If you don't know about a certain rule or anything, you're going to find it right away. So overall, the quality, it's top-notch. You have an index as well. Now let's talk about the contents of the PDF. First of all, why is it called the Dark Eye? Well, there are these mysterious objects shaped like dark eyes that were created by deities or perhaps even very powerful wizards, and they are used to look into the past or maybe the future, or to look into secrets. Some of them are cursed, so they play a central role when it comes to the magic of this setting of Aventuria. Now, Aventuria feels a lot like a melting pot of the best elements of fantasy role-playing games. You have different environments, people, cultures, you have cities, you have tribes. So you want to have adventures in the desert, or perhaps in the frozen tundra, or in the mountains, or at sea. You can have any sort of adventure that you like. You have all the tools for that. These core rules give you the basic information to get started, with tables of the deities and demons and the mysterious and antagonistic 13th god. But unless you want to create your own version of Aventuria, you will need the setting book that will come out later. Now let's talk about the basic rules of the Dark Eye. The basic mechanic is making a roll below a certain value. In the more simple cases, you take your 20-sided die and you try to roll below perhaps 14 or 13 or whatever value is needed. And depending on how well you roll, you will add quality to that particular check. That will result in additional bonuses, because maybe you wanted to climb up a mountain or a tree and you rolled really well, and maybe you climbed faster than expected, or maybe you're looking to gather information and you gain some vital clues because of the way you rolled. But the more, let's say, intricate skill checks have to do with rolling 3 20-sided dice. I recommend that you use different colors to make those rolls. And that's because each of the skills in the Dark Eye are linked. They are linked to three attributes. And you need to roll below each of these attributes to succeed at the test. And so at first that could seem a bit difficult. If you miss the check with just one die, you fail at the check. However, you have skill points depending on how skilled your character is at a particular task. So it's going to be quite fun to distribute your skill points. Maybe you needed a bit roll below 14 and you rolled 16. Well, you could use 3 or even more skill points depending if you want to add quality to your roll to succeed at different checks. And you even have fate points that represent that measure of heroic luck that will get you out of sticky situations. So this is a game where skill checks feel like they matter a lot. That it's better handled if you have a few meaningful skill checks to see if you can turn the situation in your favor because of the quality of your roll. And this has to do with combat as well. Although, as I was telling you, depending on the type of action that you're carrying out, you roll just 1 die or 3 dice. Let's talk about the different steps of hero creation. When creating a hero, you need to follow 15 different steps, so it's somewhat of an involved process. I would recommend handling a session that has to do with just character creation, and the details on how the characters got together and on why they are adventuring. And the steps are as follows. First, you decide your concept of the character, and then you choose an experience level. Depending on the experience level, you're going to get more points to build stronger characters. So it depends if you want a more grittier experience or something a bit more heroic. You choose your race and culture. You allocate points to attributes, professions, advantages, and disadvantages. Although disadvantages will give you additional points, but of course they will make the life of your character a bit harder. And then you improve your abilities, you calculate derivative values such as related to combat, you calculate combat techniques and special abilities, you review your choices, and the last steps, it's all about just reviewing some details such as your character's age and name, buying equipment for your character, calculating the right characteristics and such. So it's not a difficult process, but it's somewhat lengthy. It feels like a minigame within the role-playing game of the Dark Eye. So as I was telling you, I recommend that you have a session just for character creation. Even though, although if you want to get started right away, you have sample characters, so you can use these pregens to start playing. And then we have a chapter detailing races in the Dark Eye. Races, you get 4 of them. They are somewhat standard, but different enough to feel that they fit into the setting of Aventuria. So you have humans, elves, half-elves, and dwarves, with all the background information and mechanical information as well. For example, the life point base value, their spirit base value, etc. Of course, some will be able to take more damage, some will be a bit more resistant when affected by magic. And with additional supplements, you could get other races if you want to play something a bit different. Then you have a chapter detailing cultures. You have all the information concerning human cultures, elven cultures, and dwarven cultures. There are enough differences so that they feel like sub-races of the races. So you have glade elves, wood elves, you have diamond dwarves and hill dwarves, etc. And you have all the information concerning professions. Something that is also really cool, cool addition, is that during the character creation process you have like packages with different details concerning professions, so that the character creation process is a bit faster. And you have mundane professions, magical professions, and blessed professions. When it comes to magical professions and blessed professions, they add a lot of character and flavor to the setting and the game. So for example, you're going to have cat witches or raven witches, you're going to have grey mages or white mages or even guildless mages. And when it comes to blessed professions, each one of these professions has to do with one of the deities of the setting. So perhaps you're going to be the blessed one of Boron, or the blessed one of Hesinde, or of Perain, etc. And then you have a chapter detailing advantages and disadvantages. Well, of course, advantages are going to make life a bit easier for your character. Maybe your character is ambidextrous, or maybe your character has an aptitude for something, or maybe you have a beautiful voice. Maybe your character is blessed, or maybe your character is difficult to enchant, or you have some sort of exceptional skill. And you can take these advantages to have additional points during the character creation process. But this, of course, will make life somewhat difficult for your character. Perhaps your character is afraid of something, you have like sort of like a phobia, or maybe your character is annoyed by minor spirits, or maybe your character has bad luck, or you're blind, or you are deaf, maybe you are fat, or maybe you have decreased life points, etc. And then you have details on character skills. All the details concerning skills handled in a competitive way, or maybe in as a sort of like cooperative way when the group participates, perhaps to push a big boulder or to build something and such. And each one of these skills has several applications that will give you additional bonuses for particular tasks. So for example, maybe your character has the body control skill and he specializes in acrobatics. Or maybe another character specializes at running or at balance or combat maneuvers. So it's quite fun because you're going to be looking for situations in which your character is going to excel thanks to these applications. So you have different physical skills and social skills, such as, for example, maybe your character is very good at disguising himself, or has a lot of knowledge of etiquette. Or you also have nature skills such as animal lore or fishing, knowledge skills and craft skills. You have a lot of skills. So each character is going to feel quite different from every other character. It's one of those games that you feel that you could be creating characters and characters and characters, and they all feel quite different. Now let's talk about combat. Combat feels... even though it happens in the mind's eye side of things, it still has a very deep simulationist aspect to it. You basically have like two barriers before you can score a hit. First, you need to be successful at your combat check, but your opponent also has to fail at a parry or a dodge roll. If you manage to score a hit, you deal damage, but there are also critical successes, so you deal a lot more damage. And there are also botches, both in attack and defense, so maybe it could result in your weapon breaking, or maybe you stumbled and got out of balance. And this adds a lot of grittiness and a sense of the unknown and unpredictable in combat. So combat shouldn't be handled like a casual affair. This encourages you to see combat as something more realistic. Something that I really liked are the different modifiers depending on the size of your weapon. Because, for example, if you're using a short sword or a dagger against a long sword, you're going to have a disadvantage to your roll, and even more so if you're using it against someone wielding a polearm. But depending on the situation, maybe you're fighting in a very cramped space, perhaps a cave, or maybe a very thick forest, then the one using the shorter weapon will have an advantage over the combatant using a longer weapon. So you have all the details concerning ranged attacks as well, and casting spells is handled somewhat similarly, although I think spells are easier to connect, but they cost arcane energy points, of course, and karma points if they are blessed abilities like liturgies and chants. And in combat you have all the details concerning different weapons and fighting styles, details concerning ambushes, mounted combat as well. And you will get hurt in combat. The more damage you take, your character will be in pain, and you will be fighting less and less efficiently throughout the battle. And you have all these details that add a lot of realism to combat, both range and in melee. And so, as I was telling you, the game encourages you to handle combat like a very serious affair. And you have combat special abilities such as alertness or catch blade. Like you have, for example, if you're wielding two weapons, you can make a sort of like a cross guard to block and attack. You can also charge. You have all the details when wielding one weapon in each hand, or using a shield, and those situations in which using a shield is actually a bit of a disadvantage. You have disarm, deadly thrust, many things to do in combat, and you shouldn't feel like overwhelmed by all the different options. They are there so that during a particular situation you don't have to depend too much on improvised rulings. If you want something a bit more specific, you have all the information right here for all those combat situations and maneuvers. Now when it comes to magic and the work of the gods, which are basically the abilities of the blessed ones and wizards, you have all the information for spellcasting rules, creating like artifact magic, summonings, different rules on magical traditions, so that you can customize your wizard a bit more. And for example, if you're a witch, you can have your own witch broom. You can fly on the broom. How cool is that? And for example, maybe you want to have like an elf wizard. You have elven magical songs. And when it comes to the work of the gods, that is casting liturgical chants, you have the information on the different traditions and different churches. So for example, a cleric of a deity of healing is going to be quite different from a deity that focuses more on luck and combat. You will be immune to certain things. So for example, in the case of healing, you're going to be immune to disease. And if you are serving a deity that is sort of like the god of thieves, you're going to be a bit more lucky with your skill checks. Another chapter goes into more detail concerning the rules. You have details on social status, on regeneration, because as you take damage and you spend all those arcane energy points and karma points, you will need to camp and rest, and depending on the place that you camp and weather conditions and such, maybe you will have a bit of a hard time regenerating those points. You're going to have more details on damage sources, heat and cold, visibility, because your character will be exposed to acid and fire, and maybe your character will get tired. It depends on the many things and situation. You have all different details concerning strategic movement, structural damage, on how to award experience. And then you have the chapter that is the bestiary. It's somewhat of a short bestiary, just enough beasts to present a challenge during your initial adventures. So you're going to have some demons, elementals, animals, familiars. And then you have a very extensive list of equipment, anything that you can imagine, even grouped by equipment packages customized for different adventures. For example, if you're having wilderness adventures, you have a package for that, perhaps the travel package or the wilderness package. But you also have a city package, so it's quite useful to get started right away. Instead of picking each and every piece of equipment and gear, you have these packages to smooth out that process. And you have many weapons, such as the basilisk tongue, the dragon tooth. You have foils and rapiers. You have clubs, swords of different kinds, barbarian swords, long swords. You also have ranged weapons, crossbows, bows, throwing clubs. I haven't seen too many of those in role-playing games. All the different information, also information on armor and prices at taverns, anything related to equipment, gear and services, even vehicles. You have the list of prices right here and all the pertinent information. You have a very cool chapter on game tips, useful tips for both the game masters and the players. You have a checklist for successful gaming nights and how to prepare your adventures. And at the end of the book, you have an appendix with a checklist for optional rules. This is going to be quite useful because spread out through pretty much every chapter, you have all the different optional rules to make things easier and complex, like I was implying some minutes ago. So here you have this checklist to check maybe you don't have confirmation rolls, or maybe there are other ways to regain fate points. You have a different way of handling skill group checks, etc. So this is quite useful. For example, you're having experienced Dark Eye players at a particular session. You can have them knowing everything that is going to happen during that particular role-playing game session. You also have a list of common abbreviations and tables and tables and tables. You can pretty much build your own game master screen if you want to do with these useful pages. And the character sheet, wow, it's more like a character document. It's basically 5 sheets to organize everything about your character. This is a game where you put a lot of intellectual and emotional investment on your character, and you will not like it when your character dies, so you better play smart. Now, what do I think of the Dark Eye core rules? This game surprised me quite a bit because all the things that I would consider that would be a sort of like a detriment or negative that would make the game look generic when compared to other fantasy role-playing games actually work in favor of the game. The setting feels archetypical rather than stereotypical. It takes the best elements of fantasy literature and games. The checks with using your 3 20-sided dice, instead of feeling like cumbersome or complicated, feel really fun and add a sense of importance that your rolls are going to make it feel as if that particular check is vital to gaining clues or to crossing across some particular hostile environment. And this is a game in the style of failing forward. That is, if you fail at a particular check, instead of getting punished for it, the story goes into unexpected directions that will surely present some dangerous and negative consequences later on, but it enriches the general storyline. And the way the character process is carried out, it also didn't feel complicated. It felt like you were actually creating something alive, something breathing, just like the setting itself, because to my understanding, the setting of Aventuria constantly evolves with each passing year. So there is a sense of everything being quite organic, living and breathing. And overall, if we were to take all the simulationist aspects and narrative elements, everything feels like a very neat and sophisticated experience that somewhat, rather than pushing you forward, it takes your hand and guides you into this setting of Aventuria, so that you can have all sorts of adventures. I was telling you, different environments, different people and cultures are going to result in different experiences with each campaign. So I highly recommend that you get the Dark Eye core rules. And this is just getting started. This role-playing game and setting are going to be heavily supported. There are many adventures and campaign books coming along. So there are going to be many options to take your adventures in different directions and to handle things a bit less stereotypical than your average fantasy role-playing game. Well, thanks for watching my review. If you have any comments or questions, please let me know. See you later.